Okay. Hi, everybody. It is day 14, and we are so excited to have Colleen Cruz with us today. I have to tell a little mini story. Colleen, you were presenting at a conference. I don't remember where, but I ran to try to get to your session. This was fairly recently, and it was beyond packed. People in the aisles. And I squeezed in and I got in and I was down on the floor and all I could see was this little window, which was your screen. I could hear you, but I could never see you the whole time, the whole session. And you were talking about this.
Oh, yes.
I was
yes.
absolutely transfixed because what I love about these two books, and if you don't have Colleen's books, Writers Read Better, this one is narrative, this one is nonfiction. I love how it goes reading, writing, the lessons weave together. So here's what it looks like in reading, here's what it looks like in writing. And my daughter and I are in the middle of planning her last unit for her fifth graders when they come back finally to school after being away for a year. And we have been using these one after another just to talk through what it looks like.
Oh, fun.
This one, Deciphering an Author's Truth and Perspective. She's had all of this reading going on. Well, now let's go back and look at that as we plan the big truths in the stories that they're writing, because they're going to write fiction. So you are, one of the things I love that's in your title, Director of Innovation for the Teachers Reading and Writing Teachers College Project. I've got to know, what does that actually mean, Director of Innovation?
I mean, it's a little bit of a dream job. Some people know my boss is Lucy Calkins, and she basically is like, you need a title that matches what you do. So I come up with new stuff. That's what I do. So I lead a lot of the work at the project around digital literacy. And so and now it's funny to even think there was a time people weren't sure if you should use one-to-one computers. So how do we read and write with digital tools, and also working with students with IEPs and making work more accessible and successful for students with disabilities. A lot of work around social justice. So I do a lot of the initial piloting, trying, researching, connecting with people, which is really fun. And then I leave the hard work for everyone else. No, I'm just kidding. But like, it kind of feels like that. I sort of dream the dream and then like get a team around me. And then usually I pass on the baton and move on to the next project, which is kind of a fun thing to do.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we're so happy you're with us today. I first stumbled across your work back in 2005.
Wow.
This idea of, wow, can we make kids independent writers? Can we make them, can we position them so they'll actually want to write without the teacher hovering over their shoulders? And it's something that Penny and I still talk a lot about, but to me, there was a real eye opener, all those years ago when I read that book. But I think the reason we'd like to spend our time with you today is we'd like to discuss your new book, which is Risk, Fail, Rise, a teacher's guide to learning from mistakes. And I loved it. I gobbled it up when it first came out. And so when you agreed to join us today, Colleen, we were very, very happy. Let's talk about mistakes. One of the things you talk about in the book is this idea of negative versus positive mistakes. Can you share some thinking about that?
Well, I think that there's a misunderstanding that all mistakes are good, and I don't think they are. I think that you can learn from all mistakes, but that there are some mistakes you should try to avoid because they can cause harm. And then there are positive mistakes that we make intentionally or not intentionally, but there's either no or very little harm that's done in the process of making them, but the payoff, the amount of learning that happens is so high that they are worth making. And so I think one of the reasons why I talk about the positive versus negative is just to sort of get rid of that notion that all mistakes are worth making, and that we should never try to avoid making mistakes if we can help it, especially as educators. And two, that our stances are different, our responses are different based on whether we would view the mistake as positive or negative, and how we, either the mistake maker or the mistake, I don't know, receiver is the right word, but how we respond will be because it's either a positive or negative mistake.
What would be an example of a negative mistake?
I mean, for me, I think a lot of negative mistakes are mistakes where um, the cost benefit ratio is off. So like, for example, I'll use like a personal one. So like a lot of people mispronounce my name, right? And teachers mispronounce kids' names all the time. And that is a mistake, yes. But if this is happening over time, this can really affect kids' feelings of being seen in a classroom, that their teacher is bothering to get to know them as a person. Sometimes it becomes, like I can say for myself, I've been in places where people start to make fun of my name because of the way teachers say it and how it's different than the way I say it. And like there's a lot of the negative mistakes that I'm really thinking about right now, and I think are right now in a lot of teachers' forefront of their minds, are things around racism and cultural responsiveness, and just things that often we step into that can have real harm around identity and sense of self and feelings of security in a classroom.
Mhm.
Those are huge, huge things for us to think about. And I appreciate what you said about names, because as a high school teacher, I had many students who, on the first few days of school, they felt that not just from one teacher, but from one teacher after another, right? An unfamiliar name that is mispronounced every single class period means that it isn't like it happens over time. It all happened on one day, but it's the cumulative effect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Powerful thing to think about.
One of
It
the
is.
other things you ask teachers to think about too is, like, in the class, some of those mistakes are rooted in a power imbalance. What,
Mm-hmm.
what do you mean by that?
Well, I think that I mean, there's so many things to think about, but there's the mistakes that teachers make, and there's the mistakes students make. And in some of the mistakes that we make are because we lose sight of our power. Like, we don't realize that our choice to do or not do something can have rippling ramifications that kids and their families might not necessarily feel that they can speak up about. So, like, for example, here in New York City, we had spring break last year, and last week, it feels like last year, last week. And there was a whole discussion about whether you send homework or not send homework, since so many kids are remote, and that kind of thing of like, well, if the kids don't want to do it, then they won't do it, was what some teachers were arguing, not realizing that in some families that's not an option. You do whatever the teacher says. And if the teacher says that you need to do this assignment, and you were planning to, I don't know, go to a online church service or visit your grandma in a socially distanced way, this is going to supersede that. That there are all kinds of mistakes that we make as teachers, almost forgetting that the power dynamic is such that the response of the person, the student or the family, is less than our ability to change the response. And the same thing when a kid makes a response. When a kid makes a mistake, and our response is going to weigh a lot more than their response or their friend's response, because we're the one who has the power to grade them, to give them feedback, to promote them, to write their letters of recommendation. And so if we're displeased with them and their mistake, it's a lot different than their friend being annoyed with them.
I remember an anecdote in the book where a teacher, or maybe, I don't know if it was you or you were citing another teacher, but a teacher snapped at a kid in front of everybody, and at least had the foresight, once the teacher decided to apologize, to ask the student, do you want this apology as a private apology, or would you like it as a public apology? I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that was a friend of mine. She snapped, these were older kids. Um, a, a child said something totally inappropriate, but her response to it was way over. And I think anybody who's taught has had that experience. And I
I have it
know,
with Penny 3 times a week, but that.
And she was talking about how she and I are friends. So when it happened, she was like, I need to apologize to him. And a group of educators and I were chatting about it. And she was like, I don't know what to do. And ultimately she decided that the public apology that she wanted to make was really almost to make her feel better, like to feel penance almost. Like she was saying it was to model for the kids about mistake making and public owning of mistake. But she realized that if it was really about him, she needed to check with him. And kid age and kid power structure, really, like different kids have different, like she was sort of surprised that he was like, no, I really appreciate the apology, but I really don't want to bring this up again. I don't, everybody has already attacked me and been upset and made fun of me, and like I just want it to be over. And I think that, yeah, I think that the idea of educators focusing on the impact and the students that they've harmed and putting and making that part of the relationship and the response to mistakes is incredibly challenging, but is also to me is the thing that makes it different. To be thinking about, how am I making this better for this kid, not just what's going to feel better for me.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's powerful that even in your title, risk is the biggest word, because every day we teach as a risk that we're going to do something that we'll regret, or we won't do quite right, or we'll, because we're in this very human mistake making work. And so I like that the book is focused on kind of the recovery from, so that you don't give up on taking risks, because we need, if your director of innovation piece is a perfect example, we need to get kids involved in digital work. But if we're too afraid of letting go of even that little bit of control, then we will never move forward. Just like, when I talk to leaders about, if you're going to really give teachers the power to take risks, then you have to stop doing things like having pacing guides, because it tells teachers they can never move off of this plan that is spelled out, right? And so how do we, like within the community of school, become a risk-taking, mistake-embracing place for both the adults and the kids that are there? That's what I love about what you're doing in that book.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's about like looking to see, where do we see kids are not taking risks? Where do we see that we're not taking risks? And then trying to unpack the systems. And I think a lot of the time in schools, we're really good at slogans and posters and sayings, and then feeling like because we said it, it will be so. And and not looking at, well, every time I ask a question, my entire class is silent. Could there be something about the system that makes taking this risk not possible? Like, is there something about the way that I'm doing things? And I think schools are filled with, quite frankly, hypocrisy of like, we tell kids to take risks. We tell them you'll learn if you take risks, but then we grade you if you don't. Like, if you get no mistakes, you get the highest score. And we know that's not the person who's taking the most risks, is the person who's getting the perfect score. Yeah.
Great point.
One of the things you also talk about in the book, and I think it's really important now, especially for teachers who are teaching in a pandemic, is that one way, you can never eliminate your mistakes, but one way of cutting down on your mistakes is making sure that teachers are good about self-care. Mm-hmm. Say a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, I will say I was definitely raised as somebody to martyr themselves. Like, my family puts a very high emphasis on suffering for the good of others. And so I was made to be a teacher. And
Wait a
I
minute,
think
are
that
we
there's,
sisters and I didn't know this? Because that's my
yeah, I was on the phone with my mother yesterday and like, it's just the stories, like, there's just, there's a lot of praise that comes with self-sacrifice. And so self-care, I think I always saw it as sort of like, and I still don't even love the term self-care. It makes, but I'm using it because I know that that's what people understand and use a lot themselves. But the thing that got me into thinking about it is that when I started to analyze my mistakes, when I started writing this book and I started analyzing when I made mistakes, the horrifying reality that most of my mistakes that I could have easily avoided came from a lack of self-care, came from being tired, came from um, skipping a meal, or came from not exercising, or one really funny thing, like not spending time not doing teaching, like just hanging out with friends, or like, playing a video game or taking a walk or something like that. And I could pinpoint to the mistakes I regretted the most happening almost without exception when I was in this vulnerable lack of care situation. And I realized that self-care wasn't just because it was good for my spirit, but it was also good for students. And I realized that there's also some kind of messed up psychology in that too, that I'm more willing to do self-care for others than for myself. And we could spend some time on the couch talking about that. But I, just this weekend, I found myself wanting to push harder for things, doing things for my family. And I thought, but if I stay up to finish I think it was like make another treat or something like that. I don't remember. I'm not going to be present when they want to play. Like I'm going to be so tired. I'm going to be grumpy. And so like, who cares if there's extra cookies if like I can't sit on the floor and play a little while. And so I do think that for many educators, that taking a risk in teaching, trying a new method of instruction, trying a new assessment system, trying a new text, maybe doing a new book club move, we're a lot less likely to be able to do that if we only slept 2 hours the night before or skipped breakfast, because who has the energy to take a risk when you feel like you're running on fumes, and who has patience for children's mistakes when you're barely holding on. So
I think we've all had those days, like, and I mean this literally, this is not hyperbole, where you're in a classroom and you're so tired, you actually can't get a sentence out correctly at times. Like I've been there.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
yeah.
I can remember landing sometimes from going out to do consulting work and getting home at 3 or 4 in the morning and needing to get up at 5:30 to get to teaching. And you really truly feel like by the end of the day, you don't have a bit of patience for anyone. And it's not, I see teachers doing this all the time, staying up late into the night, grading papers or planning lessons, or especially new teachers. There's so much pressure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's a
This,
great point.
yeah, this may relate to like the risk taking you're talking about, but one of the other things you talk a lot about in the book is the role fear plays in mistake making and how you respond to the mistakes that you make.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, if I look at my absolute worst responses to students' mistakes or my own mistakes, it's so like to me, I think that we make mistakes because of fear and we respond to mistakes badly because of fear. Um, and if I didn't do self-care, I'm more likely to be jittery and more likely to be afraid. But embarrassing amount of times I've responded like, a student asking, can I write about da da da? And, you know, me saying no, not because I thought it was a terrible idea, but because in my head, I'm picturing the parents complaining, or I'm picturing the administrator having an issue, or like snapping at kids on field trips because I'm worried about blank. And I do think as educators, one of the questions we want to ask ourselves when we're making a mistake or whether or not we're deciding to take a risk or not is what is the role of fear? Like are we making this decision? Like people, all of the hubbub about like disrupt text and re-looking at the canon and thinking about that, like a lot of that is based in fear. People do not want to reconsider because they're afraid of like, what does that open themselves up to? What are kids missing? And I think do look deep and dark at that fear and like really think about what is this thing I'm afraid of, and what is the cascading effect of that fear? What are the choices I'm making to avoid that fear?
Oh, you know what? One of the things you're landing on right there is the fear that teachers have of what their colleagues will think of them, what their colleagues will say about their teaching. Oh, I don't want the kids going to the next teacher and saying that was such an easy class. Or there's a lot of fear that, instead of having the honest conversation with a colleague, being afraid that they're hearing it secondhand and you can't defend yourself is a serious part of the dynamics of schools.
Yeah. I forgot, and Penny, in our intro to 180 days, how many decisions teachers make in a day? It's something like 2,500 decisions. I mean, mistakes are inevitable, right? And so I just love the book, Colleen, on how it just helps us kind of embrace that idea, and that the idea of good versus bad mistakes. I love that idea. Now, we've been trying to keep these at a reasonable length, but we also try to end each time with a couple of little lightning round questions. So I'll go first. Yankees or Mets?
Cyclones.
The Cyclones.
That's the minor league.
Oh, I love that.
In Coney Island, they are the feeder team for the Cyclones. And
I love that.
Yeah, you can see the beach and you can see that's where I go, right on the seashore. Yeah, who can afford a Yankees ticket? Come on now, I'm an educator.
You're talking to somebody who loves minor league baseball. I've been to minor league parks all over the country.
Have you been to the Cyclones?
I have not, but it's now on my to-do list for sure.
All Brooklyn purveyors of food, so like the best food you will ever have in a ballpark. Brooklyn lager. I mean, it's just like no joke. Yeah.
Good to know. Good to know.
Portland, Maine's minor league park is that all of these businesses have come in that have amazing food right around the edges. That's a fun place. So my lightning round is, when we get better opened up as a country, you're going to have choices to make. And what I want to know is the first concert or art show. What are you most craving to see that you haven't seen in the last year?
I'm a show person. My kids are really into theater and music and anything with a stage and microphone and curtains. So anything off Broadway, on Broadway, rock, basically anything that involves a stage and people.
The last workshop Penny and I did was in outside the city, right as the pandemic hit, and we saw one of the last performances of Hamilton. It was amazing.
Oh my God, that's really cool. Yeah, I mean, I would definitely do Broadway. I think my very first stop will probably be friends of mine own a jazz club, and jazz clubs are a little tight right now because you can't. So I'll probably be going to Smoke in Manhattan because it's tiny and you can't go there right now. And then that'll be my first. And there's a stage.
I love it. Let's finish with what are you reading?
I'm reading a couple of things. I always have sort of a professional development book on tap, and then I usually have some sort of fiction. So right now I'm rereading En Comunidad by Colleen Cruz, which is all about translanguaging. And I read it before it got published, and now I'm rereading it, which is, it's such a freaking beautiful book, and just loving reading that book again. So I am, and then I'm on an action kick right now for my fiction. I think I just need my mind off of things. So I I just finished The Marrow Thieves, and had a like mourning period, and then picked up Later, by Stephen King. So I'm on an action page turner, can't sleep at night kind of mood.
That's a brand new book from Stephen King, isn't it?
It just came out. Yeah. And Marrow Thieves I had held on to for a while because I knew it was going to be delicious, and I held it onto it till I need like a book I could just completely lose myself to, and it did not disappoint.
Love that book. We used it actually in book clubs in AP Bio for the DNA book clubs, and kids loved it. That is such a great book.
Such a great book.
Well, as we are taping this today, it is very early in California. That I want to say what a treat it is to start the week with Colleen Cruz and talking about her new book, Risk, Fail, Rise. As I said, I've been a big fan for many years, and what a treat it is for you to come and hang out with us this morning. I want to thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun to hang out.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll see you this summer.
Everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody else, we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.